Give us peace. In Latin, that is dona nobis pacem. Those words, give us peace, have been part of the Christian service for centuries. They express our human longing, don't they? Oh God, give us peace. For 5 weeks now, King's Chapel is focusing on peace as we lead up to the 100th anniversary of Armistice Day, the end of World War I on November 11th, 1918. The end of what was supposed to be the war to end all wars. So the choir concert next Sunday evening is titled Dona Nobis Pacem, Give Us Peace. And we'll be singing that beautiful round called Dona Nobis Pacem right after this sermon. We'll sing it weekly, and we will be preaching on the topic of peace. Our history program will offer 2 lectures about World War I, including a presentation after worship on November 11th about 3 King's Chapel members who lost their young lives in World War I. Air pilot Hamilton Coolidge shot down in France just days before the war ended. Nurse Helen Homans, who served at the front lines in France and died just 5 days before peace was declared. And then yesterday, a dozen of us spent a full day being trained by one of our partners in the city, Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. They step in to support families when a murder has taken place in Boston. Did you know 8 people have been shot to death here in just the last 2 weeks? Dona Nobis Pacem, give us peace. Give us peace within our city, within our divided country, within this vast and fractious world, within our own hearts. Dona Nobis Pacem. But how? Are you and I just wishing for peace, or are we waging peace with that same tenacity that we might wage war if called upon to do that? And do we wage peace best from the top down or from the bottom up? Those have always been the 2 options. At the time of Jesus, one could wage peace as the Roman Empire did, and did effectively. Peace that was dominated from the top down, imposed by that dominant power, requiring peace, obeisance from its weaker subjects. This Pax Romana, as it was called, was real for those living under it, a vast improvement to the constant wars and raids that had plagued humans for so long. There was an astounding 300 years of relative peace throughout that entire empire, that is, wherever its powerful soldiers kept the peace. Now, at the end of World War I, there was also peace imposed by the winners on the losers, and we know the losers resented it, and World War II came far too soon. During the Cold War that followed, the mutually assured destruction doctrine let the Soviets point an overwhelming number of nuclear warheads at us, while ours pointed back at them, so that neither side dared launch the nuclear missiles, and the Cold War stayed cold from the top down. But against these traditional time-tried ways to wage peace, by the dominant on the weak, Jesus foolishly proposed a ridiculous alternative, telling them just the opposite of what usually goes. Jewish peasants were supposed to wage peace within their own hearts and then see what happens. Transform the world from the bottom up by legions of us who see every life as precious and astonishing and immensely valued. Jesus tells his disciples in today's story that, of course, the whole rest of the world tells us to dictate goodness from on high. Me on my throne, James and John in the places of honor right here at my right and my left. We 3 emblazoned in glory. We will ensure truth and light. You other 10 disciples somewhere below, well, actually maybe down there resenting it and plotting a coup. Stop, screech. Beloved, says Jesus, that is the world's way, but it's not yours. You don't set up hierarchies of worth, one above the other. Everyone is valued, cherished beyond measure. I came that each of you might have life and have it abundantly. The key to everything is to know how much you're loved, to love your neighbor as much as you love yourself in God's kingdom of peace. No one ranks better because of their grades or their hard work or their title. No one sits on a rung lower because of their weight or their failures or their crimes. Jesus could have said to that loyal band of followers, of disciples, don't really wish for a ranking based on your goodness because you 12 are going to fail me when I need it most. In the world, rulers demand a high throne and the powerful ones act like tyrants, but that's not our way, says Jesus. We don't measure worth by power or money or position. Our way is to serve everyone, to value and welcome all. That's our highest aim. Oh God, grant us peace this way. People from the ground up choosing to treat every other human being with dignity. Dona nobis pacem. Or is that completely impractical? Beneath us, bowing and scraping before people we can call scumbags, liars, maybe even from S-hole countries, animals. Make us great again, everyone else bowing and scraping before us. Gregory Boyle is trying it the Jesus way out in LA, reducing gang warfare by acting like the one he professes to follow, waging peace by living as a Christian, valuing gang members who come his way. Each gets his business card, and when any follow-up asking for training and a job, they receive it over and over if need be, because people mess up and need lots of choices. What makes this Jesus' program? Seems to be that Boyle and his staff value the young men and women who come to them, know them, incessantly tell them that they're loved by God. And Father Boyle's only rule and response is dignify each other. Do for your neighbor what we are doing for you. And if they can't yet, then they need to leave. But they're invited back when they're willing to try again. Boyle says that he is waging peace by listening. Waging peace by listening. Is that something you would like also? Not someone to preach at you, but someone who will talk with you. Listen, value what you have to say. Father Boyle, you see, takes the phrase that Jesus uses to be a servant of all, and he keeps on banishing hierarchy, that throne and that splendor. James and John to the right and the left. No, says Boyle, even if you're acting like a servant, Christian service doesn't mean me helping you. If that implies me, the helper, and you, the helped, down a bit of a notch. Me, the giver, and you, the recipient, there. Me, the healer, and you, the wounded. Those are still hierarchies. The servant getting to feel very proud. Instead, the Jesus plan of service, says Boyle, means a willingness to see ourselves in kinship with everyone else. Everyone. The relationships are all mutual. Father Boyle won't say that he has saved his homeboys, as he calls them. They've saved him. They've transformed him, brought him closer to God, and deepened his life. Boyle says that what we want is a compassion that can stand in awe at what those who have suffered have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. He quotes Pema Chodron, a Buddhist nun, and I found this quote when Miguel asked me for it. She says that the truest measure of compassion lies not in our service to those at the margins, but in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. No hierarchy of good and bad, just all kin. No healers on one side and wounded on the other, just all kin. No volunteers who think they have something to offer, to give back, to contribute, and recipients who need to learn, just all kin. I have learned, says Father Boyle, that it's never about saying very much at all, but rather about receiving and listening and valuing people until they come out with their hands up, feeling perhaps for the first time valuable, receiving them and allowing yourself to be reached by them. That's all that's asked of us. And anyone who is the proud owner of a pulse can do this. Wage peace by listening. He goes on, one of the things that keeps us from the margins and the joy of mutuality that is possible in this way of seeing all of us as kin is that we constantly disqualify ourselves. What could I possibly say to gang members? I've never been to prison. I don't have tattoos. If it's all about talking to gang members, then it's rarefied. If it's about delivering that message that will save and alter a gang member's course, then it remains, well, about us saving the day. Listening and receiving is the great equalizer. Really, who can't do that? Sometimes it's just plain hard, he says, to locate the will to be in kinship, even though, isn't it really our deepest longing? But no matter how singularly focused we may be on our worthy goals of peace, justice, and equality, they can't actually happen without an undergirding sense that we belong to each other. Now, we can be astonished at what Jesus says because he calls us to love our enemies. Or says Boyle, we can just love our enemies and so astonish the world as to jostle it from its regular course, maybe even jostle it into a lasting peace. There are two stories I want to end with that come from the second book that Greg Boyle wrote. It is called Barking to the Choir. His first book, Tattoos on the Heart, is one that we'll be reading together on Wednesday, November 6th. I recommended it this summer. It's one of the best books I've read ever, and certainly the best of the last year. Emmanuel Genovese and I will be talking about it here in this little room right behind the pulpit on Wednesday, November 6th, after our 5:30 evening service. Here are the two stories. They're really good ones, so I'm sure I'll get to them. Let me tell you, in my own words, not nearly as good as his. The first has to do with a young man named Robert. He is someone who works there at Homeboy Industries, the company that has been founded to put gang members to work. Initially, they had many ideas about what the gang members might do. Some worked, others didn't. They initially had Homeboy plumbing, and as Father Boyle says, people didn't really want gang members to come into their home to fix the plumbing. Go figure. But they started some other industries, and one of them includes a bakery, and one of them includes being there at the headquarters where they get many visitors who want to come and see what the program is all about. Robert works there at the main office, although in Boyle's words, work might be a bit of an overstatement. He seems to always find problems with something. His paycheck was a little bit short, or he's complaining about a supervisor. He really can be a pain, says Greg Boyle. And he always steels himself whenever he sees Robert coming his way. It turns out that Robert was orphaned at an early age, and he bounced from home to home, sleeping on different couches. Amazingly, no one in LA ever seemed to notice that there was a child with no parents, and he was never, ever put into foster care. But he has survived on his own, and now with this job, he also has an apartment that he lives in by himself. But when bills are due, and it always seems to be the day he talked to Greg Boyle, Boyle just tries to keep his patience, tries to say, okay, I'll remember that this is one who needs special care. After one particular check was asked for and Greg Boyle had written it for Robert, Robert said to him, will you give me a bless, G? That's what people call him, G for Greg. Give me a bless, will you? And so Father Boyle leans over, as he does with all of those with whom he works, and he gave a blessing to this young man, remembering that his birthday had been just the day before. Oh God, I am so thankful for Robert. I am so glad that he came into this world. Because of him, the world is a more precious place. And then, said Greg Boyle, for a reason that is completely beyond me, I said, even though he can be a bit of a pain in the... but. And the young man stopped after the amen and looked up and said, well, the feeling's mutual. There is a bit of a mutuality that they are committed to there at Homeboy Industries that catches you off guard, but that tells you something powerful is being done. The second story is about a visit that Father Boyle made with two of the young men in Washington, D.C. Often when he's asked to come speak, and it happens all the time, he takes with him some of the young men and women with whom he works, and they become the primary presenters. On this particular trip, they were testifying before a subcommittee about how to address issues of gang violence. And when it finished, they had a little bit of time before their flight back from Washington to LA. Father Boyle took the two young men who were with him, who he describes as very large people, tattoos all over them, catching everybody's eye, the kind of people who need seatbelt extenders on the airplane. And so as they decided what to do with their time, he said he would like to take them to the Holocaust Museum. That has often had a powerful impact on the young people he brings to Washington. They agreed that after 2 hours they would meet together back at the main entrance, and when they did so, they were talking about their impact, the impact the visit had had on them, a powerful and challenging impact. But they noticed that off to the side there was a little desk with a man, seemed to be balding, glasses, quietly reading his book, not at all affected by their conversation. And curious, one of the young men went over to see who this person was and noticed a sign at the desk that said Holocaust Survivor. They all took a deep breath, wondering what that must be like. And Father Boyle and the first young man decided they would just go to the gift shop. They didn't know how to possibly approach the man. But one of the second of the young men said, I'd like to learn more. Later, as he told what had happened, he explained that they had talked about both being in prison. He had said, I've been in prison for more than half my life, and the man said, not looking very impressed, well, you know, I was 13 when I went to Auschwitz, and I saw my mother die, and I saw my siblings die, and you in those American prisons, you get a bed, and you get a pillow. Me, if I had stepped out of line, any time I could have been beaten till I was killed. The young man responded, well, actually, I know what you mean. I stepped out of line once and I was beaten so I looked like the Elephant Man. And one time, when they didn't like what I was doing, I was thrown naked into a cell with nothing to sleep on but the floor. Still didn't seem to impress the man who had survived the Holocaust. But then the boy said, I really miss my family also. I never knew them that much. And now the Holocaust man connected. But Father Boyle, on hearing the story, said, I cannot believe that you chose to make yourself seem like a Holocaust victim. And the young man said, oh no, I wasn't trying to compete with him. I just did want to connect. What are the ways any of us can connect with one another, be in mutual relationship, see each other all as kin? And if we were to do that, then would we be intent on waging peace, making sure that every life was valued so that all could live in abundance. Amen.